We're learning Gemara, Parak on Ashraf, 9th Parak, Ariel. Hey, hope you had a nice Pesach. Page, Pei Gimel Amid,
Mario.
page,
Yeah.
Pei Gimel Amid Beis. Top of the page. We're going to try to finish the Parak. I thought next Parak was Chelik. I forgot that the Parak Chelik is the 10th Parak. So we have one more short Parak until we get to Chelik. All right. We're talking about the different laws of a person, the different, whether someone who, but the Kohanim, we used to not allow someone who served while they were impure, and different punishments or things that the Mishnahs on Pei Aleph and Aleph, it says one of the different things that you get punished by death. That, for instance, it says in the Mishnah, Kohen sheshimish betuma, Kohen that served while he was impure. So his brothers wouldn't even take him to the Bezdin. They would, the Pirchei Kuna, the young Kohanim, would just hit him with sticks until he died on the way, or outside the temple space. So then it also brings down that we learn about. Also, it says, then it says, there's a Mishnah finishes off. There's Zor, a non-Kohen, meaning someone who's not a Kohen, who serves in the Beis Hamikdash. So Rabbi Kiva says the punishment is choking, and the rabbis say the punishment is death by heaven. So that's the last part of the mission. That's what we're holding. So Zor she'achol Terumah, and a Zor, a foreigner that also eats the Terumah. So what's the law there? So Amar Rav says, Zor she'oichel as a Terumah. If a non-Kohen eats Terumah is the kind of tithings that they gave to the Kohen. So loika, the punishment there is lashes. Amalei Rav Kahana of Rav Asi the Rav. So Rav Kahana and Rav Asi replied to Rav's ruling. Leimer Mar, does our master want to say Leimer Mar b'misa? Let our master say the punishment is not lashing, but death. Because it says, we have like this, the verse says, Rashi says, we have the verse says, V'chol zar lo yoichel kodesh, anyone who's not a Kohen, zar means someone who's foreign, Toishav Kohen v'sacher lo yoichel kodesh. Okay, so it says, and then it says, V'shamers mishmarti v'lo yisrael avchetu mesu. So we have a pasuk that says, keeping the laws and you shouldn't die. We're not sure how to apply the two verses together. Both of them are in Vayikra. So it says, one is verse 9 and one is verse 10. So the Rabbi Rav Kahana and Rav Asi say, Lema Amar, does maybe Rav want to say that b'misa the chsiv v'chol zar lo yechel kodesh, that anyone who's foreign, who's not a kohen, should not eat kodesh, things that are holy, i.e. truma. Ani Hashem mekadesham. A pasuk. So the Gemara answers no. Ani Hashem mekadesham hivsika inyan, because it says at the end of verse 9, which in chapter 22 in Vayikra. It says v'shamers mishmarti, you should keep the watches, and there shouldn't be a sin. And you will, hey Howard and Beth, and umesu, you will die because you desecrated. And then it says, I'm God who sanctifies you. So I'm God who sanctifies you. The Gemara says that separates that the next verse that says anyone who's foreign shenadi kodesh is not included in verse 9 that says that a person who eats, who's non-Kohen, who eats truma should continue kind of the law, which says that they get the death penalty. It's a new verse. So Ani Hashem mekachim hifsek inyan. So the Gemara says, Meisvei, the Gemara asks a question anyways according to Rav, where we have a clear brisa that says, Ve'elu hein shav misa. Clearly the brisa says, these are people who get the death penalty, meaning by heaven. Zara oichlas a truma, a foreigner, non-Kohen who eats truma. So why does Rav say it's only lashes? So the Gemara says, Masnisa de Rav Karam, is he asking a question from the Mishnah on Rav? Rav Tanhu Palik. Rav has a special status as an Amora. What was the thing? The rules of the Talmud is that everyone in their category are able to have a disagreement, but once you go to the next category, they have to accept the ruling. For instance, we have the Mishnah and the Talmud. Someone who's a member of the Amaroim, which were the rabbis of the Talmud, cannot argue on a direct statement unless he has support from the Mishnah. So if a Mishnah says a statement without an argument, so the rabbis of the Talmud can't disagree with that statement. That's already fact. They could explain it. They could bring proof. Maybe someone else disagrees from a Mishnah, but to just blatantly disagree with the Mishnah, they can't. The thing is that there's certain rabbis who crossed over. Who's one of the rabbis that crossed over? Is Rav. Rav was both a student, a nephew of Reb Chia, and he was also a Talmud, a student of Rebbe. But he's the first generation of the rabbis of the Talmud, Rav and Shmuel. So the Gemara says to us that Rav Tano Polik, he's on the level of a Tan and he could argue. So even though he's considered from the generation of the Amoraim, but he's so close that you can't just ask a question from Rav on a Mishnah because Rav can disagree with that. Okay. I'm not going to go into all the Rashis because I want to finish the parak. So the ruling is basically Rav holds that a non-Kohen who eats Terumah gets lashes, although we have a Mishnah that says, and possibly verses that support it, that say that a non-Kohen who eats Terumah tithings would get a Rav. Beth, I'm going to put you on mute because there's some static coming up. Okay, so the Gemara continues. What about a zar that serves, a non-Kohen that serves in the temple? The zar sheshimish. So the Gemara says, "Techsiv azar karv yumais." A non-Kohen that serves. It says in the verse, "Eshaki," non-Kohen that we're on page 83.2. We're finishing off the Mishnah. By the way, Shaki, I made a mistake. Next parak is not chelik. Next parak is going to be Elu hachinakin, those who get choked. And then after that, it's a short parak. We go to chelik, is parak 10. Okay, the 10th chapter. Okay, back to the Gemara. The Gemara says, "V'zar sheshimish v'chsiv azar karv yumas." A non-Kohen that serves in the temple, it says clearly a non-Kohen that serves will get the death penalty. V'timei sheshimish. What about a Kohen that is non-pure that serves in the temple while he's not pure and knows about it? This goes down to the question that was asked by Reb Chia, the son of Avin of Reb Yosef. And how do we know that a Kohen that is not pure, is impure, that serves in the temple is b'misa? So it says, there's a verse that says clearly, Daber al Aaron v'albonav. There's a pasuk that says in Vayikra as well. Vayikra chapter 22:2. So the verse says, Daber al Aaron v'albonav. I'm just going on the pasuk. V'nozru, from the word nazir, cut yourself off, meaning v'kachi b'nei Yisrael v'lo yichalu Hashem kachi Hashem magdishim li ani Hashem. That they shouldn't desecrate. If they're impure, they should be like a nazir. They should separate from serving. So how do we know that a Kohen that's impure that serves, the punishment is death? It says they shouldn't desecrate the temple. Hashem kachi, my holy name. And we learn.
I know. But then I made the Bible pretty good.
And we learn chilul from Terumah. We learn that it says, the verse over there says, doesn't say what the punishment is. It says don't desecrate. But what happens if you do desecrate? So now we want to make a gzeir shava that it says by Terumah that a Kohen who's impure that eats Terumah, the punishment is death. And so it says also, like we learned before, the lo yisu alav chet v'umesu, that's talking about a Kohen who eats Terumah, that he gets the death penalty. And it says the word chilu means that they desecrate. So we use the two words to compare that the ruling would be the same, because the Torah doesn't tell us about a Kohen who serves what the punishment would be. It says chilu mitruma. Ma'al misa, just like over there, the death penalty, it's punishment by death by heaven. Afkam misa, so too, a Kohen who serves in the temple impure also gets the punishment of death by heaven. So the Gemara says, if we're already using the word chilul to teach us as a gzeir shava, we could also compare it to other cases that we have a clear ruling that says the word chilul, and the punishment will be different. For instance, we should learn that chilul minaiser from sacrifices. Noiser is leftovers. So most sacrifices have cutoff dates, and after that cutoff date, you're not allowed to eat it. And if you do, so what is the verse? The verse says in Vayikra 19, it says, a person who eats nosar, leftover sacrifices, even a person who's permitted, meaning the Kohen, is ki eskachi Hashem chilel, he desecrated God's name, so he gets the punishment of kares. Kares is a different punishment by death than misa b'dei shemayim. Misa b'dei shemayim is you die by death. Karis is your soul gets cut disconnected. The word karis means to be disconnected. So the Gemara challenges, why should we compare serving as an impure Kohen to Terumah eaten by Kohen that was impure? Let's compare it to the case of Noser. Noser says the word chilul. Ma'alahal karis, and over there clearly the Torah says the punishment is to be cut off. So afkan karis, so too the punishment should be karis. There's a different kind of death penalty by heaven known as karis, which is more severe. So the Gemara says, "Mistavra mitruma have." So the Gemara says, no, it's better to learn it. It makes more sense. Mistavra means from Sfara. Logically, it would make more sense to learn it from truma. Why? Obviously, because noiser is about a food. The food is the problem, and a Kohen who's impure, the Kohen is the problem, and so too the Kohen is the problem when the Kohen is impure and eats truma tithings. So it makes sense to compare where the Kohen is the problem versus where the food is the problem, where the thing is the problem. So he says over here, and so where his body is impure. So like and he needs a mikvah. It's a goof. He's impure. First of all, it's a goof. It's something about the person. His tummy is impure. Mikvah. He himself needs to go into the mikvah, just like a person would have to go into the mikvah to eat tithings. You have to go into the mikvah to serve, means to immerse yourself in the pure waters. It's birabim. Also, it says the word chala. It's a more plural, like it says v'leyichalalu, and by noser it says chilel. So the word itself is a plural word, and also when it talks about serving, it says yichalalu, also plural. So it's, if we have to add things up, it would make more sense to compare it to Terumah versus Noser. So the Gemara says, Adrabah, minoser have lemelef. We should learn it from Noser. Shekain Kodesh, both of them are talking about in the Kodesh, in the Beis HaMikdash itself. Noser is a sacrifice that happens. Panim, it happens inside. Pigul v'noser, and there's the actual food can become desecrated. So the Gemara says, so basically the Gemara challenges like this. The Gemara wants to figure out where's the best thing to learn from. So Terumah from Terumah is, the comparison is that by the case of Terumah or the Kohen who's impure, both of them is a body thing. Also, they're both tameh. Both of them can become purified by mikvah. The wording is a plural word. So if you're comparing words, Gezer Shavar compares words, we go with a plural word. This is a more of a kind of a factual Gemara that we're going to go to till the end. Where the challenge the Gemara says that we should compare to Nosar is both of them are talking about Kodesh, that they're talking about things that are in the temple. Terumah is not the temple. Terumah is foods that you tithe from your field, that you give to the Kohen. It's not something connected to the temple. It's not done inside. And also Pigul Noiser or Kachim, it says also, which is that the service could have something that could have Pigul Noiser, which Terumah is not connected to that at all. Basically, do we go on the kind of service that's happening or the person that's serving? If we go for the service, Pigul and Noiser are service-related things, like the Beis HaMikdash. And the Kohen, we're talking about a Kohen who's impure, who's in service. So it means the Kohen being impure is not the problem, is that he's doing a service while he's an impure. Where the Terumah is a tithing, which is that the person is consuming Terumah, that's a gift to the Kohen while he's impure, and he has to be pure when he consumes it. And over here it's talking about the Kohen is impure when he does a service. So the question is, do you go after the person, the personality, the person that we're talking about, or going about the service that's happening? So in service, it would make more sense to compare to the sacrifice because it's a service-based thing. Whereas if we focus on the person, the comparison is Terumah is more comparison. So the Gemara says, which way do we go? So the Gemara says, because the wording is better to compare to Terumah, it's Rabim. It's more of the word itself is more comparable because it's a plural word versus a singular word. So for the grammar part of it, we go to study out of Terumah, and therefore the punishment is different. It's not just a question of how do we know. It's a question of therefore what's the punishment? The punishment is Misa b'dei Shemayim versus Karis. Okay, this is part of the 13 rules of Torah. So it may seem to a regular person as, so what? What's the difference? But it is a difference, because how we understand the ruling of the study is how we decide what the death penalty is. Yes, Aaron, quickly.
Just a thing about the grammar, because I don't understand any of the grammar. So you can explain how it works or anything.
So just in short words like this, we have one of the rules in Torah is that we don't understand the ruling. We try to find comparisons of the verses. And so the verses over here teach us that there's the word chilul. Chilul is a Hebrew word mean desecrate. That what the person is doing is a desecration, whether it is eating a sacrifice out of its time, or being impure and eating tithings, or being impure and serving in the temple. So we don't know what the ruling is for being impure and serving in the temple. But there's the word that the Torah describes what you're doing is a desecration. So we want to know what happens if you do a desecration. So we look at other places where the Torah says a person shouldn't do a desecration, a Kohen shouldn't do a desecration. Either we can compare it to a case where a person eats a sacrifice out of its time, or a person who eats tithings and when they're impure, a Kohen who eats tithings that it's impure. The word desecration in Hebrew is chilul, but you could say it as a desecration in a plural manner or a singular manner. So when we're looking at how do we compare the words, because we have to compare the words, we'll go with this the similar grammar, which is in the plural. It's a plural desecration versus a singular desecration. So it's just a technicality. Thanks for the question. We're going to continue. What about a tful yom, a person who is gone to the mikvah but hasn't yet waited for the sun to set? That's the rule. You go to the mikvah, and then there's an in-between time that you have to wait for the sun to set. Okay, so it says like this: a tful yom sheshimash. So what is the rule of a tful yom sheshimash? The Gemara teaches us, sorry, page 83, it's also subject to the death by heaven. Minolan, how do we know that's the ruling? Mm-hmm. So the Gemara says, we know it from like this. The Tanya we learned, Reb Simin Omer, Remez l'tfu yom she'im avad chilal minayin. So Reb Simin says that from, how do we know? Reb Simoi says that what is the hint that a tful yom, someone who goes to someone who goes to the mikveh hasn't yet waited for the sun to set, that if he serves, he's also a desecration. You should be sanctified to your God, and you shouldn't desecrate. We can't say that the Torah who's seemingly repeating itself, that a person should not desecrate by serving while they're impure. It can't be talking about a total impure person that hasn't at all gone to the mikveh. Whatever, it could be that their time to go to the mikveh hasn't arrived yet. Because that we already said the verse again, Veinazru. There's a verse already tells us from the word nazir. Nazir means to hold yourself back, like a nazir who holds himself back from drinking wine or other things that they shouldn't be doing, cutting the hair, etc. The different laws of a nazireth. So that's the root of the word. So we know that from that verse we already know that someone who's impure shouldn't serve. So why does the Torah repeat itself? It's the teacher to news, then we should apply it to the tful yom sheshimash, a tful yom, someone who went to the mikvah but hasn't finished the purification, because one has to wait even after the mikvah. You must wait till the sun sets, and if you jump in and do the sacrifice before, then also that is considered a desecration. And just like we learn the word chilul, we again apply the word chilul from Terumah, just like over there, the punishment of eating Terumah while a Kohen is impure is the punishment of death. Obviously, we're talking about pure Terumah. Terumah, because foods also can become impure. So if the Terumah is pure and the Kohen is impure and eats it, so the verse clearly says such a case, the punishment is death. So he says, just like over there, by Terumah, a Kohen who eats it while he's impure is the death penalty, meaning by heaven. Afkam Misa also over here is death penalty. Okay. The Gemara is not going to challenge that with the question of chilul from Noiser, because we already discussed it before. Now the Gemara says, what about a Kohen who is lacking the garments? We all know the Kohen and the Kohen Gadol have very specific garments. The rule is, like the Rambam quotes, that the Kohanim, that the Gemara is going to quote now, the Rambam quotes the Gemara now, that says a Kohen, it's almost as if you're not a Kohen without the begadim. It's a very strong statement. It means what makes you a Kohen is the garments. It's not that a Kohen that has garments. While they have garments, they're a Kohen. If they don't have garments, it's as if they're not a Kohen, which makes you wonder about today. The Kohanim don't wear garments, and they still do Kohen things. They get the first aliyah, they give the blessing, but it's obviously talking about the service. Okay, in those days also, the blessing was done in the temple. Okay, so how do we know a Kohen that's lacking garments? It's also punishable by death. Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Vo says in the name of Yochanan, Shimon. Others say that it wasn't in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, it's in the name of another rabbi known as Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon. The Torah tells us about Moshe Rabbeinu instructing the Kohanim that they have to wear garments. So it says that they have to put on their belt. They have to be belted. They have to be belted. That's the verse. V'chagarta means they have to be belted. Avnet. A beautiful talk of the Rebbe. Now is not the time about this whole idea that's one of the reasons why there's an argument between the Rambam and the Ravid. If a Kohen is allowed to wear the garments while he's not in service, because the garments of the Kohanim have what we learned about in this week's parsha. We learned the laws of shatnez. You can't wear clothing that are made up of wool and linen, and the clothing of the Kohanim and the Kohen Gadol were made up of wool and linen. And the question is, can they wear these garments if they're not in service? If they're not in service, there's no reason for them to wear the garments that are of shatnez. So there's an disagreement about this with the law in the Rambam and the Ravid. This is not the time. So it says that you have to be belted with a belt. Bisman. So the Gemara says the Gemara learns like this. Bisman shebigdeim aleim kunasam aleim. As long as the famous Gemara, as long as the Kohanim are wearing the garments, then their kahunas on them. Means the kahuna, their priesthood is dependent on the garments. Aim begodim, and the Gemara finishes off, doesn't just say it halfway. Aim begodim aleim, if their garments are not on them, and kunasam aleim, then they're not considered kohanim. So if they're not kohanim and they serve while they're not wearing their clothing, the proper clothing, it's as if a foreigner serves, which is a very strong statement. Havel huzarim, then they are considered foreigners because they're not wearing their clothing. Means that a non-kohen who wears the garments means nothing. But not only that, you're doing a sin because you're wearing shatnez. But even a Kohen who's not wearing the garments, then they're also like a zar, they're also like a foreigner. Which has to be explained because there's other things that a Kohen does. For instance, tithings. A non-Kohen can eat tithings. A Kohen doesn't have to. It doesn't say anywhere Kohen has to wear his garments while he is eating the tithing. So it's talking about the service part. Amar Mari learned, and before, Zar Shishimish b'misa. So therefore we know, so a person who's not wearing garments, the punishment is death. We continue. Mechusa kabara, another component that a Kohen has to do after they become unqualified to serve because of impurities, they have to bring a kapara. Kapara means they have to bring a sacrifice. What happens if they have not yet brought the sacrifice and they want to serve? Mechusa kapara minalan, someone who has not yet brought the sacrifice, then how do we know that such a person is punishable by death of heaven? Minalan Rav Huna says the verse teaches us. Until, what do we see from here clearly, like Rashi says, that it says that the Kohen is going to do a kapara, is going to do an atonement, and when they have the atonement, then they're going to become pure. I.e., until the purification, until the atonement happens, the purification doesn't happen, i.e., they're still impure. No, well, Keith, a good question. It's a similar thing. The idea of the reason why we swing the chickens over the head is a kapara, is an atonement. So this is the same idea. That's an atonement done before Yom Kippur for our sins. But in general, a person who's impure who goes through certain things that they have to have a kapara. So if a person hasn't yet have the kapara, they cannot serve. So mechusa kapara minon. So Rav says v'chipar aleim kohen v'tara tar miklashi tmeya. Until they do the kapara, until they do the atonement, they're considered impure. We learned before, an impure person who serves, a Kohen who's impure serves, is punishable by death. Okay. What about, there's going through different things that the Kohen does that is not, that disqualifies the Kohen for service. What about if the Kohen comes in? We know the Kohen has the kiyur. There's the faucet that is in the temple that the Kohen has to use to purify themselves before service. What happens if the Kohen does not wash his hands and feet? They used to wash their hands and feet. It was a challenging thing. They'd wash their hands and feet before they'd hold on to their foot and wash them together. So what happens if they didn't do it? Minolan, how do we know the punishment by death? It says a boil oil moed yirach to mine v'lay musaf. It's clearly the Torah tells us when you come in to serve, you should wash your hands and you won't die. It means if you don't wash your hands, you will die. All right. The next question is, how do we know that a Kohen who's under the influence of alcohol, wine, also should not serve? The Torah clearly tells us in Parshas Shmini, after the sons of Aaron died, God speaks directly to Aaron and tells them that one should not serve while under the influence of wine. What about Perui Rosh? Someone who's here is just left long. The Chsiv Roshim La'Yigalechu Upara Le'Ishachu V'Chsiv Rasev Yain La'Yishtu Iskash Pru Rosh L'Shtur Yain Mashus Yain B'Misa Pru Rosh B'Misa. So just the verse says that you shouldn't serve. They shouldn't. It says over here. The verse is also over there. It says the Kohanim shall not completely shave their heads. So they can't completely shave their heads. So it says, and they should not, and they should grow they should grow they should grow part of their hair. They had a kind of system of how they cut it. And so, but it doesn't say the punishment, but the punishment says that you shouldn't drink wine. So when it says right afterwards, so we compare the drinking of wine to a person who doesn't cut their hair properly, that if it doesn't have the proper hair cutting, then the punishment is death. What about a orel? Orel is a person who is a non-circumcised person. Doesn't mean that the person's not circumcised by choice. It's very possible the person's not circumcised. There's halachic reasons you shouldn't circumcise. There's reasons, there's certain times when a person does not have to circumcise themselves for whatever the reason is. We're not going to get into the laws of that, but for whatever reason, the person is an orel, and oinen, or a person is after the death of a close relative that you consider the laws of oinen. Oinen is a person who has lost either father, mother, depending on the person, so that until the burial, you're considered an oinen. So that moment you also can't serve. Or yoshev, the service has to be done while you're standing. What happens if you serve while you're in the sitting position? Bahazara. So that is it's only a warning. Oral b'nolan, how do we know a uncircumcised person? So Rav Chizr says, we don't see it clearly from Torah Moshe that a non-circumcised person should not serve, and it's a warning. So where do we know it from? Until the prophet Yecheskel, the son of Buzi, Lamandu, and he teaches us from the Navi, says, "Kol ben oicher oral leiv v'oral basar layav mikdashi l'sharseini." A person who has a uncircumcised heart, an uncircumcised in their body, then they should not come into the temple to serve me. So there's a verse, although it doesn't say in Moshe, it does say it in Yecheskel. Again, it's a hazara; it's not punishment by death. Oinen, a person who is sitting is in the state of onen, means you're still in the early stages after death of a parent before the burial. Minalan, how do we know? The first day is an onen. Minalan d'chsiv min hamigdash layetze. It talks about Aaron and Kohen. When Aaron's first sons died, right, 2 sons died, it says you shouldn't go out of the temple. You shouldn't desecrate the temple. That's talking about only the Kohen Gadol. But anyone else, chilul. But that's only Aaron and Kohen at that time. That Aaron Cohen was not that the high priest is not considered an oinen and doesn't leave the temple, but a regular priest has to leave, otherwise he desecrates the temple. Rav Adi says to the Rav, so why are we saying that the punishment is a hazara, a warning? Why don't we take it all the way to say that it's punishment by death? Just like it says the word chilul, like we said before, a gzeir shava. So we would have the wording that could teach us. That's not just a warning, but it's also punishment by death, because we could use the word chilul to support the death penalty, because it's comparable to tithings that a Kohen eats and is impure. So the Gemara says, it doesn't say anywhere that the Kohen who's an onen, again, the first 24 hours of mourning, should remove himself from the temple and not desecrate. It just says that the Kohen Gadol does not. And from this we learn that the Kohen Gadol does not, but all the Kohen does. So it never says the word chilul by a regular Kohen. It's just a limud. So you can't take a limud and on top of the limud add a gzeir shava. That doesn't work like that. So he says That's what the Gemara says. Mi ksiv bei bigufei. Does it say by a regular Kohen in himself? Michlal. It only comes from a ruling. Have a davar abom in a klal. The kol davar abom in a klal. Ain't done because oiseh b'gzer shava. So here the Gemara teaches us another part of the rules of Torah that only comes from an understanding. That because Aaron was excluded means that anyone else is included should not remain in the temple. But once it's only learned from the klal, we can't add to that gzer shava. Okay, that makes sense, right? Then the Gemara continues. Yoshev, how do we know a Kohen who's in the sitting position should not be in service? Minon Amar Rav says. It talks about the Kohen. That God said that Moshe says that God chose the Kohanim from all the other tribes la'amoid to stand lisharis to stand in service. I chose the Kohen to stand, not to be in the sitting position. We learned also balmum. So what happens if a Kohen is of blemishes? A blemished Kohen cannot serve. This depends. They're not going to go into the laws of the blemishes, but there's blemishes, different types of blemishes that are temporary or always. I was just actually those who learn Rambam, one chapter a day. The Rambam. I'm learning. I'm actually it comes from another place. I'm learning the Mishnah's Kotshim now. So I'm learning B'chayris. In B'chayris it talks about the blemishes of a firstborn animal. That goes to the Kohen, that if it has a blemish, then it's different. Then the Kohen doesn't have to sacrifice it, he could eat it. The laws of Bechor. So over there, it teaches us the different blemishes and applies those blemishes in Perek Zayin, I think Perek Zayin Orches, to the blemishes of a Kohen. So there's certain things that are temporary, certain things that are forever, the certain blemishes a person has, left hand, etc., eyes, vision, different things. One of the things is interesting enough, extremely red hair. It says that someone who has extremely bright red hair, that disqualifies them for service. So it says, my grandson is very red here, so I hope that wouldn't, he's not a Kohen, either way. Shiva. Ba'mum, how do we know a person who has a blemish? Rabbi Oimer B'misa, that if you serve it, the punishment is death, if you have a mum. V'cham Bazar, Cham says it's not punishable by death, it's only a warning. My time in the Rabbi, what's the reasoning of Rabbi? That's punishable by death. Again, we're just doing this fast, and hopefully it was understood, because we're trying to finish the parak today. The Kodesh Chodesh. It says, the verse says, a person who has a blemish should not come past the curtain. And again, we use the word, it says that it's a desecration. Pasuk Gimel says, those who have the side, says, because he has a mum, a blemish. And you shouldn't desecrate my temple. So it says the word desecration. So Rabbi says, my time the Rabbi achal prechas layavai v'yalv yachil mitruma. Malhalam b'misa, just like over there, it is punishable by death by heaven. Afkam misa, so over here, it is punishable by death by the punishment of Bezdin. So the Gemara jumps back in to understand, because when we asked the question the first time to compare a non-pure Kohen of eating truma or service, the Kohen had a temporary problem, which was that he was impure, that was purified through mikvah and other things. So therefore, the Gemara challenged and came out to the conclusion that the plural overrides the comparisons to noiser. But again, the Gemara challenges this idea. The Gemara says, why don't we learn chilul from nosar, which is extra leftover sacrifices that fell out of their time? So it says, and again, here's the word, it says, v'lo yichalel, it's the singular. It's just like nosar, it's the punishment is not punishment by death, just regular death by heaven, but it's karis, which is a more severe punishment by death of the soul being cut off. Af kamakaris, mistav mitruma havelel. The Gemara says no. It makes more sense to study it, to compare it to truma. Why? The Gemara says shekain pasal aguf. Again, the truma is a problem with the person. That by truma the Kohen is impure. So too, this is a bodily problem. Pasal aguf, better to learn something that's a problem with the body than something that's a problem with the sacrifice. With the sacrifice. The Gemara says, on the contrary, if we should learn from Nosach, Kain Kodesh, it is something about something of holiness. Again, in the temple, Pnim, it's inside. Pigul v'Noiser, it has in it. It can become Pigul and Noiser. So the Gemara answers, what's the Gemara's answers to this question? Because it's actually a better question, because you can't say singular, because it is singular also by a person who is blemished. So it says, the Gemara says, Ella mitamish shimish v'lo yichalu ki gomar pasal haguf mi pasal haguf kodesh v'tnim pigul v'noiser mi kodesh pnim pigul v'noiser. Claiming yafinim bam boom shishimish mitamish shishimish shekein shavaloi b'chol dvar ma'elu v'lo yafinim minoiser shim kim shavahu loi b'kodesh v'tnim. Okay, so he says the reason is because the comparison basically is totally comparison. It's a bodily problem, where the problem with Noser has other things that its problems, and the Kohen is not about Noser, it's not leftover, it's not 100% comparable. So in the comparisons of things, the Gemara continues to say that we'd rather compare it to Terumah if it's a bodily thing, because it's pretty much the same thing, doesn't have extra elements to it. Okay, Rabbanan Amrei. So the Rabbanan say, why did Rabbanan not agree with Rebbe that it says that it should be punishable by death? So the Gemara says, because the verse says about a person who serves impure, it says that the so it says, the rabbis say, only such a person who's impure, but not a person who has a blemish. So because they take the word boy to teach us as if it's excluding something, so it's coming to exclude a person who has a problem not of impurity, but only a person who has a problem of impurity, but not a person who has a wound, a blemish. Okay. What about hizid v'loi b'balmum? Hizid b'meila Rabbi Aimer, if a person consciously, on purpose, is moyel. Moyel means you use things of the temple, whether it's a sacrifice or something of the temple. So that's not permitted. So what is the punishment for such a thing? Rabbi says v'misa, that if you do the laws of meila, if you take using, meila means to use something from the temple, so it's punishable by death. The rabbis say it's a hazar, it's a warning. My time of the Rabbi, what's the reason of Rabbi? Rabbi says gomer chet mitruma. We learn chet from Terumah. It says v'nefesh kisimo, but what's the pasuk? The verse says a person who does meila takes usage of something holy, kisimo moal v'chata b'shgaga b'kadshe Hashem v'viyas Hashem. Then if you do it by mistake, you have to bring a korban Hashem, a sacrifice. That says what the punishment is, and then it says also about a person who is about Terumah. That a person who's a zar who comes to the temple will be punished by death. So it says gomer chet mitruma malahal misa, just like by Terumah it says the word chet, and also over here it says a person who does meila, it's a chet. And so again, we're using the rule of Gzer Shava, it's punishable by death. Afkam Misa, Rabban Amri Amakra, boy, Vilai B'mila. Again, by Terumah it says boy, and it comes to exclude anything that's not. So the question is, how do we have an exclusion? Do we pay attention to the exclusion of the verse, or do we learn the Gzer Shava of the comparison of the words? Rebbe, in both cases of Meila and Mum, says there's the Gzer Shava overrides the exclusion. And the rabbis say, no, there's an exclusion that comes to teach us that only a person who's tamei, talking about Terumah, that's the problem, but not a case where a person is going to either be blemished or taking benefits from the temple. What about a zar? The Mishnah finishes off. Zar sheshimish b'mikdash, a non-kohen, meaning an Israelite or a Levite for that matter, who does something that they shouldn't be doing in the temple. Tan Rabbi Shmuel Leimer, Nemer Kan Razar. So the Mishnah brings down in Pei Aleph Amid Aleph or Amid Beis, it says Zar Sheshimish Migdash. Rabbi Kiva says Chenek, and the rabbis say Misi B'dei Shemayim. Okay, so we have an argument in our Mishnah. So Tanya, we learned like this. Rabbi Shmuel says Nemer Kan. It says over here by a person who's a non-kohen, Azar Karev Yumas, a non-kohen, someone who's a zar, who's a foreigner who comes close to serve, will be put to death. Anyone who comes, it talks about the case of the 250 250 non-Kohanim that try to do a sacrifice. So it says, just look over there, the case of Korach, they were punished by fire from heaven. Afkam b'dei shemayim. Rabbi Kiva says, no. He says the punishment is by the Bezdin, not by heaven. I mean, Chenek is punishment by the Bezdin. Rabbi Kiva Nemerkan Vazar Karv Yumas, that someone who is a Zar gets put to death. And says that over there, in another case, so a case by a prophet who prophesizes about connected to Avodah Zarah. Says, you must. That a prophet who tries to prophesy about serving idols, or someone who says he has a dream that one should serve idols, that he gets put to death. And Yumas is Malahan Beskila, just like over there, he gets stoned. Afkan Beskila, also over here gets stoned. Our mission says, Rabbi Kiva says Chenek. We're going to learn in a second that it's a disagreement between the opinions of Rabbi Kiva, but the punishment is by heaven. The question is what is the heaven punishment? So here we understand that to be skila, stoning. Rabbi Yechim ben Nuri disagrees, says Malahan b'chenek, Afkan b'chenek. It's not that the punishment for someone who's a false prophet or a dreamer that tells people to serve idols is not punishable by stoning, but by choking. But either way, it's punishable by the Bezdin versus punishable by death. What's the difference between Rabbi Shmuel, who says that he compares it to punishable by death, like the case of the non-Kohanim who served by Korach, or in general non-Kohanim who serve? So Michael Mithri, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Kiva Savar done in Yumas miyumas. We learn, it says the word Yumas 2 times. Rabbi Kiva Savar, it says Yumas miyumas. We can only compare this word that says Yumas and Yumas. He dies. He's put to death. Vein done him Yumas miyamus. So in the grammar, Yamus means he will die. Yumas means you put him to death. So by the case of the 250 people who did the sacrifice by Korach, it says Yamus, that they died, they will die. And here it says Yumas, you should put them to death. Rabbi Shmuel Savar done in Hedit mihedet vein done in Hedit minavi. You can't compare. By there, you're talking about a prophet. Here, we're talking about a regular person. We're not going to compare a regular person to a prophet. Better to compare regular people together. Rabbi Kiva says, teaches us a rule about a person. If he's what kind of prophet is he? He's not a real prophet. He's a prophet that tells you that you have to serve idols. He's obviously not a real prophet. He's the most simple of people. But what is the difference between Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Yechim ben Nuri? Rabbi Kiva says that the punishment by Bezdin for a false prophet, comparable to that, is a person who is non-Kohen who serves, is skila, and Rabbi Yechim ben Nuri says it is choking. The argument of Rab Shimon and Rabbanan, another argument. That what is the argument? The Tanya we learned. Navi shediach, a Navi, a prophet that tells people to serve idols. So the rabbis say the punishment is stoning. And Shimon, who's the student of Rabbi Kiva, says it's mechenek, choking. But our own Mishnah says Rabbi Kiva says the chenek. Like I said before, it's a contradiction of our Mishnah and the Brisa. So Trei Tanei Alibid Rabbi Kiva. There are 2 opinions of Rabbi Kiva. The Mishnah thinks that Rabbi Kiva goes with the opinion that Rabbi Kiva holds like Rabbi Yechim ben Nuri, that the punishment is chenek, is choking. Masnisin Rabbi Shimon v'alibed Rabbi Akiva Brisa Rabban v'alibed Rabbi Kiva, and the other opinion that the Brisa that says stoning. That's the other opinion of Rabbi. That's the rabbis who hold that Rabbi Kiva holds the punishment by Bezdin for a person who's a false prophet is stoning, and therefore the comparison would be also stoning for a person who's a non-Kohen who serves. And whereas Rabbi Shimon holds that Rabbi Kiva's opinion is that it is choking. But either way, the both opinions in Rabbi Kiva disagree with Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says that we learn Yamas and Yumas. That we learn that we want to compare commoners to commoners, not to a prophet. And Rabbi Kiva says a person who is a false prophet is the most common of people. Hadron alach elu hanisrafim. We just finished the 9th chapter of Elu hanisrafim. Right. Hold on a second. I'm not sure why, but maybe there's no Talmud on. We'll have to see what we're starting next week, Emir Tashem. It seems like there is a 10th parak, but hold on. All right, we'll have to check it all up when I get a chance to see what we're starting next. But either way, I'd like to wish everyone a chodesh tov, a good tov. I hope with this class, I know we did fast today, but we kind of got the information. It's not an easy Gemara. It's also very technical Gemara. But the bottom line is we went through all different kinds of Kohanim or foreigners or people or situations that are doing service, different ways of understanding the laws and the punishments, etc. Laila tov, everyone. Take care.
Laila tov, Rabbi. Thank you.